Well, now tell me, when did you first hear about the Komagata Maru?
It's when I went to India from my nana, and he came on it, and from there he was sent, when they were sent back. He was talking about it on it.
So tell me, what was your Nana's name?
Her name Singh Sohi. No, he said like when they were here, like the ship, and there was no security or anything first, and there's few people left from the ship, but they kind of threatened them, oh, if you leave, this and this things will happen to you and all those kind of things, and then rest just stayed behind.
And then they were shipped back to India in Calcutta. When they got off, there was machine gun shooting, and they were firing. And they came out. They pretended and lay down, so that then after they walked to India to Punjab.
Wow. So your Nanaji pretended he was dead.
Yeah.
And then afterwards he walked to Punjab.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my dad's Nanaji, Harnam Singh Sohi, he was actually on the Komagata Maru. So my family has been a part of it since it happened.
Yeah. Now tell us, did you know about that story about your Nanaji's or your relative being on the Komagata Maru?
No, I had no idea. Initially, when I was studying at UBC, I had taken Punjabi 100, and it was Sadhu Singh Binning, who was my Punjabi instructor, who had taught us about what had taken place in Canada. I was really shocked to learn about the Komagata Maru as a student because I had never heard about it, studying all through elementary school and high school, and I had even taken Canadian history classes at UBC, and it hadn't come up in any of those courses. So after I learned about it in my Punjabi class at UBC, I actually went to my dad and I was like, "Hey Dad, like, did you hear about this? This happened right here in Vancouver." And that's when my dad told me that his Nanaji was on the Komagata Maru, and I was just shocked because I had no idea that my family was a part of it. I was actually really saddened. I mean, first of all, before even knowing that my family or my dad's Nanaji or my great-grandfather was on it, just hard to just listen to the stories that our fellow Punjabi Sikhs and Muslims were on this boat. They were there for 2 months. They were denied food. They were denied water. And it was just so sad to see that this actually happened right here in Vancouver, in Canada. And, immigrants are sort of the backbone of our country. And the fact that they were denied access to food, to water, as well as to come onto our land, and then they were sent back was just such a heart-wrenching story to hear. I'm glad that my dad's family was still able to come to Canada. My grandpa's father was already here in 1906, but it was tough to see that my grandma's father, he couldn't come, and he actually never came to Canada. After that experience of being turned back and having to go back to India, he was really upset about that, and he actually never left and came to Canada. And it was my dad who went back to India, in the 60s when his Nanaji was actually quite sick, when he heard all these stories firsthand from his Nanaji of how they were treated. And he could tell that, my dad's Nanaji was very bitter, and that's why he had decided he wouldn't come. But his daughter and his sons, they all came to Canada and settled early on, but they were able to come through my grandpa's side of the family.
Arveen, tell us, when did you first hear about the Komagata Maru?
I think it was sometime in high school, grade 8, probably in social studies.
And did you spend a lot of time learning about it, or was it one day, or?
I think it was just 1 or 2 days. That's about it.
Tell me, what do you think, as a young South Asian, what do you think people can learn from the Komagata Maru? What are its living legacies?
It's basically about learning from your mistakes. So the mistake made then was that they were unjustly discriminated against. So just basically learning off of that. It keeps your eyes open for not happening again.
Arlene, when did you first hear about the Komagata Maru?
I think I first heard about it sometime in high school. It was like a page in our textbook, so I just remember reading it over, and then, yeah.
And later on in your education, did you ever come across the Komagata Maru in the
No,
textbook?
not at all. I never heard about it again after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So tell me, do you think people are aware of the Komagata Maru story?
Not as much. I feel like only when the anniversary comes up, then it's remembered. But then throughout the year, people just forget about it. So I don't think so.
That's a great point. I mean, this is the 100th anniversary of the Komagata Maru episode.
Yeah.
What do you think people can learn from the Komagata Maru?
What they can learn, well, a lot of people were discriminated back then, so I feel like that should be like a wake-up call kind of thing. So even if people face discrimination now, like, we should still stand up for everyone, like, not just the Sikhs or anything like that, so, yeah.
So you're saying we should stand up for discrimination across all communities?
Yeah, like, if it were to happen, like, today or something, like, shouldn't let it pass by. It should be, like, a ongoing kind of thing.
You mentioned the CBC and the freelance work that you were doing there, and your interest in discrimination, but also stories of multiculturalism. Is that what led you towards the story of the Komagata Maru?
Well, you know, since you asked that question, I've been trying to figure out how I came onto that, to the story, because it wasn't known before. As far as I know, I was the first person to do research into the they call it an incident, but it was much more than an incident, to the whole sort of context of the Komagata Maru. So I can remember exactly when it was, because I had a baby who wasn't crawling yet. So that's a very few months, 1975, when I was able to take him to the Vancouver archives with me, put him on a blanket and know that he wasn't going to crawl off anywhere, and somehow found the file of H.H. Stevens, the Conservative MP. And it just blew my mind what was in there. It was just full of documents that showed this very dramatic and very difficult situation. Gurdit Singh writing to H.H. Stevens. So all the texts of his telegrams were in the file. And I really remember how that felt. Like I could hardly breathe. I just thought, this happened in Vancouver. And at that point, I did the research in 1975. That's almost 40 years ago now. It still seemed like ancient history, but I knew that there would be people around who might remember.
What do we find? The immigrants from Asia, almost without exception, seek to come into Canada and establish themselves in the large and flourishing centres, picking the plums of civilization. And so I say that this question is not whether we like or dislike Orientals. That is a mere surface issue. It is a question of life and death for the national life of Canada.
I mean, Cyclone Taylor is this great, it's a great way for people to access the story because he's so well known and he has a connection to hockey and popularity. Did you find, I know you asked him this question during the interview, but did you find any sense of regret or any sense of understanding about the other perspective, what was going through it?
I guess that's what I mean by saying I don't think he had reframed it. I did not. I didn't get any sense that he was taking another look from a different point of view. But I don't think anyone was at that point. I don't think anyone was. I think that came later.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to be next in line to Mr. Malcolm R.J. Reid. I was what you call district inspector. That was looking after the whole district. And when we learned for sure that the Komagata Maru was close to Vancouver, it was arranged that I would take an East Indian interpreter, Mr. Harry Grither, to meet the boat whenever it arrived. And it came along on the morning of 24th of May, 1914, I would say about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was just breaking daylight when they arrived. So that I went aboard, explained to the East Indians that they wouldn't be able to tie the ship up for the moment, or that none of them would be allowed to go ashore until till the hours of our office was open. Then we'd see what we could do with them. They didn't mind that to start with.
Well, did you find there was a language barrier with some people in the South Asian community, and how did you overcome that?
There was clearly a language barrier. I don't speak Punjabi, and I don't know whether I couldn't find anyone who spoke English or whether this person was just recommended to me as having played a particular role or having something to say. But so I had to find an interpreter. And Ujjal Dosanjh was a friend of mine, a law student at UBC, who agreed to come along and interpret for me. And I've always liked that. That's a tough question. Things have changed to some degree. You could not now talk about a white man's country without getting slapped with a charge. It's not a white country anymore. Thank goodness it isn't. But racism hasn't disappeared at all. I mean, to some degree it has. But the recent changes to the immigration laws, once again, are making it incredibly difficult and punitive for refugees to come. And as a daughter of refugees, I have to be concerned with that. I have to oppose those changes.
I never kept a diary in my life, so I don't remember how it all started, but I remember Vera Rosenbluth contacting me out of the blue and wanting to talk about this. I was active on issues of racism, everything that happened in the community. I had views like all young people have, which they should have. And so, you know, she talked to me, and she had somehow zeroed in on the Khan family. Riyasat Khan's dad, I forget his name, and I knew Riyasat. I was either a law student or this is 75. Yeah, I was at law school, and Riyasat used to have a little insurance office at Kingsgate Mall, which is where I articled afterwards next to his office. So Vera talked to me. I told her as much as I knew about Komagata Maru, which, like, I'm not a scholar. I'm an activist on different things. And I've never pretended to be anything other than that. So sometimes I make mistakes in terms of historical facts, be that as it may. And so I told her as much as I could, and then she wanted me to talk to Mr. Khan's, Riyasat's father, and we went to their home, and we talked to him for several hours, and I translated, I think, as we went along. It was sort of simultaneous, in a sense, translation. I enjoyed that. He was in his 80s, if not 90s at that time. He was fairly elderly. He had been here at the time of the Komagata Maru. He wasn't an activist, but he knew. You know, when your community is small and you're living in bunk houses or cook houses or whatever they were called in those days, and you have, you know, signs on restaurants and other places, public places that, you know, Hindus and whatever else not allowed, then, you know, people remember. And at that time, you remember, Riyasat's father was a Muslim, but he would be called a Hindu because all Indians were called Hindus. It wasn't about religion, it was about the place they came from.
Gurdat Singh was a fantastic man who sacrificed so much for his countrymen. He was no ordinary man, you know what I mean? But how could we help them? The only thing was to contribute financially. Whatever we could, Whatever we could afford, we gave. All the workers in the Fraser mill were asked for 1 month's check. Some people who didn't want to give checks hid in the forest, others in the mill. But the Sikhs never let anybody get away. We did everything we could, but the English was so stubborn. There was a 24-hour guard on the ship, and even some shots were fired at the ship. It was a monumental task. There were even people who were willing to sacrifice their lives. Do you understand? But that wouldn't have helped.
It was a very moving experience for me, even though Mr. Khan was not directly involved in the struggle around Komagata Maru or Ghadar Party, but he'd been a witness to the history. And how many people could you talk to who were witness to the Komagata Maru and its history, or the Ghadar Party and its formation, and the travels back and forth between the U.S. and here, and the kind of struggles people went through. So that was a very enriching experience for me. One aspect of the legacy of Komagata Maru is a lesson for Canada, less so for the Indian ethnic community, more so for Canada as a country, because I think we're still not as alert as we ought to be about the rights of those that come to our shores seeking refuge, whether economic or political. And I believe that the elements that produced the Komagata Maru episode aren't too far away from the surface in Canada even today. I feel very strongly about that. That ought to be the legacy of Komagata Maru, a sense of awareness that we aren't much more advanced than we were 100 years ago.